We're talking about how for some readers or viewers of the play, sometimes they're a little off-put by Jim, the fact that he is on this date, that he kisses Laura, despite the fact that he's engaged. It was pointed out yesterday, there's engagement as a topic of conversation does come up previously, and he doesn't take that as an opportunity to clarify his situation, and that's problematic. But I did want to look at some text that not that it lets Jim off the hook or anything, but does clarify his understanding of that invitation compared to Amanda and Laura's understanding, and maybe even Tom's to a certain extent. Okay. If you look at the top of 1285, this is after the kiss. I sort of envision Jim in the rest of this scene after the kiss that, I don't know, if I was the actor portraying Jim, I might spend the entire scene just slowly taking steps backward until finally I can get out of there. Because verbally, that's what he's essentially doing when he, after the kiss, he immediately sort of starts to back off physically and verbally. But at the top of 1285, as he's telling Laura that he's engaged to Betty and talking about what it means to him to find someone that he loves, and he hopes that Laura finds someone that she loves too. He says, the power of love is really pretty tremendous. Love is something that changes the whole world, Laura. It happened that Betty's aunt took sick. She got a wire and had to go to Centralia. So Tom, when he asked me to dinner, I naturally just accepted the invitation, not knowing that you, that he, that I, he stops awkwardly, I'm a Stumblejohn. He never really finishes that thought, but with the context, what's the end of that thought? I naturally just accepted the invitation, not knowing what? Yeah, Morgan. Not knowing that this was going to be a date. Not knowing that I was going to meet you. Not knowing what this was supposed to hopefully become. Okay? When Tom invited him to dinner, what this makes clear, and remember, Jim is the emissary for reality. We can trust his version of things. This confirms that Tom did not tell him the reason for the invitation. Tom knew the reason for the invitation. Amanda made that very clear. You find your sister a man and you can leave. But this makes clear that he didn't say that to Jim. Okay? He didn't know that was the case. In a way, it just reinforces the genuine attraction that Jim and Laura experience. There's even stage directions. I think it's on the previous page, 1283, before the kiss occurs. This is after the unicorn figurine broke, the horn broke off, and Laura says at the top of 1283, oh, I'll just imagine he had an operation. It was removed to make him feel less freakish. Now he'll feel more at home with the other horses. Jim says, haha, that's very funny. And then suddenly serious. You know, you're very different, surprisingly different from anyone else I know. His voice becomes soft and hesitant with a genuine feeling. Okay. Him meeting Laura and connecting so quickly, he didn't know it was supposed to be a date. And in a way, we can even more trust the genuine nature of the attraction. Okay? And he gets swept up in that moment, and they kiss. And when that kiss ends and Laura is sinking into the couch, we talked yesterday about that is a good kiss when you're dazed and confused after it. And he says, Stumblejohn, and he immediately recognizes the error. Okay? Yeah.
Okay, so if he's like romantically interested in her, why does he say, I wish that you were my sister?
Yeah, there's a line there. Where is that line about sister?
It's 1283. It's like the second paragraph from the bottom.
Different from anywhere else, his voice becomes low and husky. Laura turns away, nearly faint with the novelty of her emotions. I wish that you were my sister. Oh boy, here we go. Yikes. Wish that you were my sister. I'd teach you to have some confidence in yourself. We don't want to separate that sentence away from the context. And it's a little confusing because things are getting romantic. But that second sentence is important. Jim does sort of provide this kind of mentor role, right? He kind of is giving her a pep talk throughout this, telling her she shouldn't be so self-conscious, all that sort of stuff. So to say, I wish that you were my sister, I'd teach you to have some confidence in yourself. I mean, it's an expression of, I wish that I could help you sort of understand what I've come to understand. Gosh, that phrasing is a little strange considering that that's before the kiss happens. But he's talking about the context of having a relationship where I could help you, I could mentor you, that sort of thing. Okay. One more thing I wanted to point out on this, 286, or sorry, page 1286. At the end of the play, Amanda accuses Tom of setting them up, right? That final screaming match. She claims that he did this to make a fool of everyone. But at 1286, we get further confirmation that Tom did not know that Jim was engaged. Jim says at the bottom of 1286 that the cat's not out of the bag at the warehouse. You know, they weren't that close of friends. They were co-workers. Remember, Tom hates his job. Okay. He's not close with Jim at the warehouse. He didn't know. He probably should have said something. He knew why Amanda wanted a man to come for this invitation. Okay. But it merits clarification without letting Jim off the hook. To kiss another woman while you're engaged, many people say that that's wrong. That's a bad decision. Jim would agree. After he does it, he backs off. But we also want to make sure that we don't go outside of the text. It would be outside of the text to say that Jim is lying to a girl to take advantage of her while his fiance is out of town. The text tells us that that's not necessarily that's not the case. He didn't know it was a date. Okay, remember, those candles weren't lit because of the date. They were lit because Tom didn't pay the electric bill. You know? So let's look at the end of the play, and then we'll see if we've got any other questions. So 1289, Tom leaves, right? But when he describes sort of his time away from the family, it doesn't sound all that great. This is what he wanted, right? He wanted to escape the coffin. He got out. But at the bottom of 1288, he says, I went much further, for time is the longest distance between two places. He says, not only did I leave them geographically, but time. I was away from them for a long time. Okay? There's never any indication that he ever returns to them. But he says, not long after that, I was fired for writing a poem on the lid of a shoebox at the warehouse. I left St. Louis. I descended the steps of the fire escape for a last time. So that tells us he never went back. And followed from then on in my father's footsteps, attempting to find in motion what was lost in space. I traveled around a great deal. The cities swept about me like dead leaves, leaves that were brightly colored but torn away from the branches. That doesn't sound very awesome. That the places he goes, he compares to dead leaves that have been torn away. Sounds like he's not having the best experience being gone. I would have stopped, but I was pursued by something. That too doesn't sound very appealing, to be chased. Why does Tom have such a tough time after leaving the family? When he was having such a tough time being with them, he should have gotten relief from leaving. Why didn't he? Yeah.
He knows that leaving wasn't the right thing.
Say that again.
He knows that leaving wasn't the right thing to do because, like, Laura still was like totally dependent on him, like at that point.
in that final speech, what makes it clear that his struggle has to do with Laura? That his struggle doesn't have to do with Amanda, certainly. Yeah, Deanna? Oh, Laura, Laura, I've tried to leave you behind, but I am more faithful than I intended to be. Now, he says previously that he went down that fire escape for the last time. So when he says I'm more faithful than I intended to be, he's not saying that like I'm sneaking back and hanging out with you. What does he mean? How can he be faithful to her without actually going back? He always thinks about her. How does he describe it in this final speech? Because he kind of uses some mixed metaphors. But how does he describe thinking about Laura? Because I don't know that he ever says, I think about you. But how do we know that that's what he's doing? Yeah, Claire?
He like sees her everywhere he goes.
He sees... It's not really a see. How does he describe it? It says, when I'm walking by a window, okay, I pass the lighted windows of a shop where perfume is sold. So I see colored glass and I think of you. We're at the end of the play. Tennessee Williams has hammered that into our heads, right? Colored glass, Laura. Fragility, beauty, all that sort of stuff. Okay? And he says, then all at once my sister touches my shoulder. I turn around and look into her eyes. Okay? But again, he's not speaking literally. He's made it clear that he never goes back to that fire escape. Okay? It's the memory of her. It's the thought of her that he's looking her in the eyes. And then we have this use of apostrophe. Oh, Laura, Laura. Okay? Remember that technique, addressing someone or something that can't be expected to reply because they're not there. But then at the end of the passage, he sort of changes the metaphor a little bit. When he thinks of Laura, okay, he thinks about where he's left her. He says that when that happens, I reach for a cigarette, I cross the street, I run into the movies or a bar, I buy a drink, I speak to the nearest stranger, anything that can blow your candles out. Okay. First of all, do you notice that when he thinks of Laura, he turns to the behavior that he was using to escape previously? When he wanted to get away from Amanda, he went to the movies, he went to bars, he drank, he smoked. He's still doing those things to cope with his own unhappiness, his own feelings. But then he says, anything that can blow your candles out. He's changed the metaphor. Okay? Extinguishing those candles means what to him? Yeah, extinguishing that connection. Like, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't. And I do all these things to try and extinguish, anything to blow those candles out, anything to make that permanent disconnection. And I can't do it. And then the stage directions tell us that if we're watching this play, remember there are candles all over the apartment from the date and the fact that they didn't have power that night. And the stage directions tell us that in that moment, the character Laura blows out the candles. Okay. If those flames are now representative of Tom's connection to his sister, why is it important, or what does it mean that the stage directions tell us she blows them out, not him? Yeah, Sam? She is severing the connection with him. He can't do it. He says he can't do it. Okay? She's the one that does it. Okay? She blows the candles out. While I don't think that Laura's in that much of a better situation at the end of the play than the beginning, she's still unlikely to be able to get a college degree because of her anxiety. She's still with her mother, Amanda, and she hasn't shown a whole lot of growth throughout the play. But what could you make an argument that Laura does have a bit of a breakthrough? And what would you use to support that? Yeah, Olivia?
When she is or not Jim, the unicorn as the student there on page 485. And like instead of being super upset like she was when Tom breaks up her glass menagerie, she's like okay with it, she accepts it, and then she gives it to him for favor.
Yeah, and that's after the kiss, right? That's after him telling her that he's got a fiance, all that sort of stuff. She seems to have learned something about herself in that interaction with Jim. A little bit of confidence, something like that. And you're right, comparing it to her reaction when Tom accidentally broke her menagerie, when she freaks out earlier in the play, this is certainly a more composed Laura that we see. I still don't know if we saw Glass Menagerie 2, the sequel, if Laura would just, have Gentleman College out the door or something like that. But she seems to have progressed in some form. Okay. Looking at the clock, I want to make sure that we can look at our first unit test and talk about that. Again, if you've got lingering questions about Menagerie, I'm just tomorrow night at the dance, I'm just going to sit out there at a desk, and you can just come talk about literature while you're bipping and a bopping. That wouldn't be weird at all, would it?
Yeah.
Okay. So on days that I return tests, sometimes we'll go through them with a fine-tooth comb. Other times I'll just pass them out and ask anyone with questions or concerns to speak with me. Today we're going to do a little bit of both because it's our first time around. First thing you always want to do when you get a test back from Mr. Costello is check his math, because he hasn't used it since 1999 when he was taking contemporary mathematics at the University of Dayton. Never used a number larger than 13. It was the math class for English majors. It was awesome. Okay, so those of you who end up at Dayton next year, see if they have contemporary math. It's great. Unless you're going to be an engineer, then you should probably take something that goes up to at least 27. The point is I can no longer do subtraction or addition or multiplication or division. So here's how you can check to make sure that I'm giving you the proper score. Here's the test itself. Here's the adorable little Scantron sheet where you answer the multiple choice. So that Scantron sheet should mark the number of questions you got right out of 10. Okay? And way back on the unit plan, I gave you the scale that adjusts for how difficult those questions are to give you a score out of 60 points. So let's say this says 7. Okay? What you'll see on the test over here is a number out of 60. Okay? The conversion is that you get 54 points out of 60 for getting 7 out of 10 correct. You'll see another number out of 40, and that comes from the short answer and lit term sections. Okay? You'll see a few markings in those sections. An X means you missed both points. Okay? You were wrong. A slash means you missed one of the two. Partial credit either due to not answering all parts of the question, or maybe your response not being as specific as the question requests. The instructions for both of those sections required complete sentence responses. So if you had a correct answer that wasn't in a complete sentence, you're getting partial credit for those as well. Okay? And then you'll see a number out of 100 circled near your name. If you checked your score on Canvas, you should notice, and let me know if you don't, you should notice that the score on Canvas is going to be 2 points higher than the score written on here. Okay. Normally, on the first test of the year, I always try to make you think that I'm nice, and I announce when you take the test, you can pick one of the short answer or lit term questions, circle it, and you can skip it and get full credit without having to answer it. And when I started grading your test, I was like, Why did no one circle a question? What is going? I never told them. I forgot to tell them. So I went back and just added 2 points. That's not a common occurrence on the test. I don't want you to get used to that by any means, but I was supposed to do that and I forgot to. Okay. So that's another thing to check too, is double check Canvas, make sure that I gave you those 2 points back. If while doing these things, you come across a mistake I made, I owe you a couple points because I can't do math. Please let me know so I can correct it. If I gave you a couple bonus points because I can't do math, you can just giggle to yourself that Mr. Costello is the 36-year-old that can't carry a 2, and assume that karma has gifted you those points, okay? I'm not going to take those away from you because I made an error like that. All right. Now, when we go through this test, I'm going to pass it back here in a moment. We're not going to go through every question and answer, because if I fast forward to December, our final exam is not cumulative, meaning I'm never going to ask you another question about the poem Edward or the short story Babylon Revisited, okay? You're not going to have to go back and review those works again because I'm going to ask you about them. Now, for your own sake, you might say, gosh, I got this question wrong about saving sorting, and I thought I understood that element of the story, in which case today, let's have that conversation. It might reveal that I made a mistake in grading, or at the very least, I can better clarify. Okay. But I am going to point out a few things about each section that I think can help us on Monday's test, even though Monday is going to be about completely different material. So let me pass back the work. Once everybody has it, I'll show you a couple things, and then there'll be time if you have questions for me. Okay. My general takeaway from our first unit test is sort of a bad news, good news situation. The bad news is that most of the points missed, I didn't like formally calculate them, but just as I went through the test, it seems that most points were missed, not because you couldn't analyze the material that we studied, but because either instructions weren't followed or questions were either misread or perhaps not fully answered. You know, questions that asked you to do 2 things and you only did 1. That sort of thing. Now, the good news in that is that those are fixes that are a lot easier to deal with. Being more attentive to assignment or to section instructions, more carefully reading questions, that's a lot easier and quicker to fix than analyzing literature, okay? I'm going to identify a couple questions in particular as sort of examples, because the way these questions are framed, the topics they cover, really won't change all that much, okay? And again, as we go through this, and not just the questions that I mentioned, but any of the questions, we'll have time at the end of class if you go, you marked this partially incorrect. I'm curious to know what I was missing or where I took a wrong turn and that kind of thing. So reserve those questions and I'll happily correct errors I made or better clarify. So for example, like question 3, where you had to pick one of the 2 metaphors and analyze its contribution to the story's theme. You've really got to do 2 things there. You've got to analyze the metaphor. What point is being made by it in the context of the story? But then to connect it to theme, you've got to provide an insight about humanity that it connects to. And remember, when you're providing theme, you've got to make sure that you're not including Nia's name, because then it's not an insight about humanity, it's an insight about Nia. Okay? And there were a handful of questions that asked you about a technique and to connect it to theme. That was one that came up often. Okay. Another question. Oh, this one, not so much that it was a problem. If you look at question 4, though Sortie is the title character, how does, quote, saving Sortie make it clear that it's about Nia's experiences? So that's me referencing the title of the story. So my question was asking you, how does something in the story make it clear it was about Nia's experiences? As I read answers, I started to wonder if some of you thought that you were limited to that phrase, that you could only analyze the title. A lot of you did analyze the title, and you did so well, and you got credit for it. But I just wanted to make that clear that, if I'm using the title of the short story, I put in quotation marks because that's proper format. If you're ever reading a question on a test and you go, wait, am I limited to only analyzing that title, or is that a reference to the work as a whole? Make sure you let me know that. That goes for any question on a test. If you're not sure what I'm asking, if my phrasing is unclear, make sure you let me know that during the test. Raise your hand, I'll come to you and try and help. Okay. One more question here to look at, and then we'll briefly talk about lit terms. On number 11, how does the structure of the poem Edward infer that his mother manipulated him? There's lots of evidence that his mother manipulated him, and not all of it is related to the structure of the poem. It's really important that you answer the question asked. Okay? Because if you answer this question and you're talking about how Edward's mother manipulated him, and it's accurate, but it's not related to the structure of the poem, then the answer is wrong. Okay? It's like, what's 2 + 2? Dog. No, that doesn't answer the question. Dogs exist. Dogs are true, but they're not relevant to the question. So make sure this is a question about how the structure makes it clear, not just how it's clear generally. Okay. On the lit terms section, there just seemed to be more, not that most people did this, but a lot of people were writing incomplete sentences on the latter questions, the later questions, but the defining questions, for whatever reason, that got dropped. So again, attentiveness to the instructions for that section of writing incomplete sentences. Number 5, describe a moment of catharsis. Catharsis is an emotional release. If your answer doesn't clarify what emotion is being released, it's incomplete. Okay? If you say, well, Nia experiences a catharsis when Sortie rejects her attempts to save her, it still begs the question, what emotion is she releasing? Is she overjoyed by that? Is she confused by that? Is she heartbroken by that? If catharsis is emotional release, you've got to define what emotion is being released. Okay. Want to look at, yeah, go ahead.
Could you phrase it like she had a catharsis of joy or catharsis of?
Yeah, okay. Just that quick little addition, catharsis of. Or you don't even have to use the term catharsis. You could just say she experiences joy, something like that. Okay. Real quickly, on the multiple choice, I do want to look at the 3 toughest questions. I say tough in that they were the most often missed. Here's the answer key if you're curious. 4, 9, and 10 we're briefly going to look at. What we're trying to do with multiple choice is learn about strategies, because the next time around it's going to be a different piece of literature, but the strategies are going to be consistent. Okay. So 4, 9, and 10 offer some tips on question structures they like to use. So number 4, part of the reason that this question is so hard is because it uses the word primarily. The narrator and Frida resent Maureen primarily for. You want to be on the lookout for that word primarily, because it tells you a few things before you even look at the options or the passage. It acknowledges that there's more than one reason that resentment exists and is asking you to rank them. So you can pretty much guarantee that at least 2 of the answer choices are reasons that they resent Maureen. And they're asking you which is the best choice, which has the most support. Okay. On these questions, you tend to be able to eliminate some options pretty quickly. A and B are eliminated because they are details that exist. She did have long brown braided hair and she was new to the school, but they don't get focused on in a form of resentment. They don't resent her because she's new or because she has braided hair. She is new and she does have it. So they're mentioned in the passage, but not in direct relation to the feeling. Okay. D can get eliminated because it describes specifically that Maureen had a different, more expensive set of patent leather shoes than the girls. They mentioned that they had the cheaper version, the generic version. Okay. My girls will grow up knowing the Aldi version of cereal, and they'll be very jealous of their friends that have, Cheerios instead of Aldios or whatever. So that's wrong because the exact opposite is the case. So then you're left with C and E. Most common incorrect answer was C. Okay, E's the correct answer. Here's why. They mentioned that she was a dream child. They use that phrase. And so that is mean of the test writers to put that as an answer choice. Okay. It's mentioned in line 16. But the rest of that section, basically lines 16 to 24, I'm just going to read some phrases. Rich, rich, richest, swaddled in comfort and care, quality, fluffy, pleats so orderly, brightly colored, white rabbit fur. The expensive quality of her clothes is harped on. They keep talking about it over and over and over. She is a dream child because of the expensive quality of her clothes. That's what makes E the better choice, because primarily. When you see that word primarily, you want to prepare for, there's going to be a couple answers, and I'm going to have to spend a little time weighing evidence and looking for what has more textual support for it. Okay. Question number 9, which best describes the narrator at the end of the passage? Focus on question, or when questions do this, end of the passage. You can pretty much guarantee some of those answer choices will be in the passage, but not at the end. Okay. And they might be true analysis, but they're not at the end. Okay. In the case of question number 9, and again, these are the most difficult questions. I always tell students, if you're getting the hard questions wrong, you have nothing to worry about, because most people are getting them wrong. We want to worry if we're getting the easy ones wrong. Okay? We're trying to figure out how can we get ahead of everybody else on the really tough ones. Okay? So we can eliminate a few things. We can eliminate A because it says she's proven that Maureen is unworthy of friendship. We know that's not true because they end the passage by saying they had to ostracize her alone. None of the other girls would cooperate with our hostility. So they didn't prove her unworthy at all. Okay, they failed in that effort. the speaker never expresses confidence in themselves. They're always trying to berate Maureen, so we can get rid of that. They don't relish major victories. In fact, they say literally they were small triumphs, so we can get rid of D. We're left with B and E. She envies and admires Maureen, or she remains bitter about her superior wealth. We know she's bitter about the wealth from number 4, but that is not the focus at the end of the passage. The end of the passage does not focus on her wealth. The end of the passage says that Frida felt bemused, irritated, and fascinated. That's called the Biff effect, I've decided. Okay? Admiration and fascination are not that far apart from each other. And that's what makes B the best choice. We know she envies her and all of the things that she has, but the end of the passage is introduced with this fascination as well. Okay, last thing, number 10, the answer is B. When you see answer choices that are 2-word pairs, adjective and noun, remember, if one of the words isn't true, then it doesn't matter how true the other one is, okay? Feigned outrage, which means false outrage, pretending to be mad. She's mad, but she's not pretending, okay? She's angry, but it's not forced. She doesn't even pretend to be gleeful. There's no irony, okay? And she's certainly not sympathetic to the cause. In an alternate universe where you don't even know what shocked or disbelief means, you could potentially get to that correct answer, okay? When you see these answer choices, if one word is wrong, it doesn't matter how right the other one is, okay? And oftentimes that can get you to a right answer, okay? So I know we ran a little late on time here. The bell's going to ring momentarily. If you have questions for me and you're in here during announcements, please come and talk to me. If you've got to get to lunch, these tests aren't going away. We can talk about these things early next week. But I do need you to return your test and Scantron to this table before you leave. Okay. So I'll be at my desk if you do have questions for me.